I walked into a very beautiful atmosphere that the facilitators and all of you have created since early today. And I'd like to share two of my experiences of illness and healing and take it further from there. One was a situation in which in the early 80s, Daddy Jayanti and I had traveled to Brazil, and I was translating from Hindi into English, and another sister was translating from English into Portuguese. And it wasn't as clumsy as it sounds, because I had this little device and I'd speak into that and she could hear it. And so what the audience was hearing was Daddy's voice, very strong. Even today, 101 years of age, she has a very strong voice. So they could hear her voice, and then they could also hear the Portuguese from the translator. So it worked fine. Except that what happened was, by the second day, I got very, very ill. And there was a person who was a yogi, who was a doctor, who came to see me and took blood tests, etc. So until the results come through and whatever, he was then giving me an injection every day that lasted precisely for 2 hours. He would come every evening, inject me, and we would drive to the venue, because every evening it was a different venue for programs. And then I would translate for Daddy for about an hour, and then he would drive me back, and then I'd be knocked out again. And the rest of the time it was fine, because the sister and Daddy had a very good connection, and Daddy's English at that time was not as good as it is today. But somehow they managed, and so with the family it was okay, and for public events that was the thing. And after some days I asked him, well, what are the blood test results? And I still wasn't getting better. Every day it was still the same, very high fever. And he said, it's a virus. And I said to him, is it that doctors say it's a virus because they don't know what else it is? And he said, maybe it's something like that. And then there's a side aspect to the story which I'll share now, because a day before we were supposed to move on, because it was a tour around the region, and we were supposed to go from Brazil, Sao Paulo, to Venezuela, and from Venezuela change flights to get to St. Thomas, which was our next stop in the Virgin Islands. And it was going to be a struggle for Daddy to manage all of that. And I was thinking, do I need to call the sister from New York to come from New York? That was the nearest next center, to come to Sao Paulo and accompany Daddy. And I said this to Daddy, and she said, okay, let's wait till tomorrow. And tomorrow night was our flight. So I was sharing a room with Daddy, and at 3:45 in the morning, she came by my bedside, and she could see it. I hadn't slept through the night properly anyway, and my body was really high fever. But what she did was just put a hand over my head and massaged it a few times, and then she went away to conduct the meditation and carry on with her timetable. Well, something magical happened with this, and I found myself being able to sleep, rest well, and by the evening I was well enough to be able to travel with Daddy. And she gave up her seat and went and sat somewhere else, I don't know. And she gave me her seat so that I could have space to lie down. And we arrived at St. Thomas and in between the Venezuela bit, and I was just able to carry on. It was fine. I got back to England, and actually I was in Scotland then for a program. And a man called Dr. Jan de Vries, does anyone remember him? He was a very powerful individual, and he passed away a little while ago. But he was a medical doctor, but he'd also studied Chinese medicine and various other things. And so he was speaking before me. And what he spoke about was the fact that what happens with the situation in the world today is that there are many, many viruses anyway in the world. They probably were here before we were, but whatever, they're here. But they don't impact everyone. Some people are impacted by them and others are not. So what's going on? And he said that the immune system has become so damaged, and this is in the 80s, remember. Today it's more or less common knowledge, but at that time it wasn't so well known. But he said that the chemicals in the atmosphere, the chemicals in the water, and of course the chemicals in the food, all of that have damaged our immune system. And so we pick up these viruses, and he didn't know my story, but he was talking about that. And because of this, then we find that people get very ill and so on. And he then said, well, you can try organic food, but it doesn't always do its job. You can try and have clean water, but again, you're never quite sure. But the other thing that impacts the immune system is our state of happiness. And when we're happy and we have hope, the immune system is strong. And then he said, well, this is what Sister Jayanti is going to talk about when she tells you about meditation. So I got my answers from him in a sense that, yes, today in the world we hear about so many different illnesses and so many different things coming up all the time. On the one side, medical technology is increasing, and there's so much that happens today that couldn't have happened 5, 10, 20 years ago. But yet on the other side, actual well-being doesn't seem to be on the increase. I know from my own father that medical science probably gave him an extra 10 years of life, probably, because otherwise, under normal circumstances with the condition of his heart, he would have gone. But the last 5 years of his life were with Parkinson's. And so although life was prolonged, the quality of life, certainly for the last 5 years, wasn't as he would have wanted or I would have wanted for him. But this is the way things go. But it's very interesting that happiness and hope are the way to be able to strengthen our immune system. And so that's something that everybody can do. Make sure that they stay happy and that their hearts are filled with hope so that we know where we are going and where we are headed for the future. The second story, again, it's around the early 80s, around then, or maybe it was the mid-80s actually by then probably. And I was in San Francisco, and some of you know how the fog suddenly comes down, and it was a bright sunny day. It was fine, and it was not winter or anything. It was a warm day, and what happened was I was having a very intense conversation with a sister who was driving, because we were alone. At the center, there were many people. When we went to another place, many people. So the car seemed to be a safe place to have a good conversation. True? Not true. Don't have intense conversations with the driver. And that was a lesson. But as it turned out at that time, we hadn't planned it in a way, I think, but it just happened. So she was driving, and it was this intense conversation. And the fog came down suddenly, and we were in the fast lane, and the car was an Oldsmobile and, very strong and sturdy vehicle. And of course, what she didn't notice was that there was a car that was stationary just ahead of her in the fast lane. And there was an impact, and it seemed as if everything was okay. She was okay, and I felt okay. And I suddenly felt something salty. I was tasting something salty, and I realized it was my blood. And then I looked down, and I was covered. And so we decided that it was still possible to drive home, and the best thing was to get home. We were not so far away from home, so we got home, and the blood wouldn't stop. It seemed that something had happened here, but it wasn't clear because there was so much blood. So anyway, she took me to the hospital, and I needed 14 stitches here. And the doctor said, can't give you anesthetic because if I do, it's the face, you don't know how it's going to set. And so you just have to be very, very still. And I could feel the suture being pulled in, pulled out, the needle going in and out. But it was fine. You know about the technique of Raj Yoga meditation where we focus in the center of the forehead and just hold that awareness, just to be Om Shanti. And so I was very aware, and I was practicing this, and it was okay. It was fine. And of course afterwards he asked me, do I meditate? I do. And that's what I was doing now. That was Friday, and I was supposed to come back on Monday, and he would see what was happening then. Over the weekend, I was just basically resting, but also I was very aware that if I wanted to continue with my onward program, it wasn't just going to be medicine that would help, but it would be my meditation. And so there was something that I've learned many years ago that I was practicing. Being here, you can send God's healing light to any part of the body that is in particular need. If there isn't a specific area of need, then just generally every day, be here and take God's light and give yourself that protection generally. But especially when there's a specific area, then you can use that power. And so I had time, and I was meditating, and not all the meditation, but some of the meditation was specifically to heal this area. And come Monday, he was able to remove the stitches. He was very surprised, but it was possible. And by the night, I was able to travel to Los Angeles and do an evening program on television. And the interviewer just looked at me and said, have you had a bad cold? Your lips look a little bit swollen. There was no other visible sign. And after that, I even managed a long journey to New York because I had to go on. So that experience of how meditation actually can heal was very powerful. And quite apart from the meditation, I also know that there's a few other factors that were helping at that moment. One was not just letting the body be still, but also having gone through a cleansing process for the body, not in a conscious way, but anyway, since birth I'd been a vegetarian, and I hadn't had alcohol and cigarettes or drugs, so the body was relatively clean. And I'm sure that that played a major role in the speed with which the healing took place. And so I think there's something to be picked up there also. So keeping not just the externals, but the internal makeup of the body pure and clean, I'm sure that that's a very important factor. And today I see Dadi 102, and yes, the body is by no means perfect, but it's strong enough for her to be able to come to London again now, age 102. She was with us this morning from 8 o'clock through till about, I think she finally went to lie down and rest around 11 o'clock. And when you put out your hand again and again and again for a few hundred times, what does it do to you? Well, she did this as part of her everyday routine 700 times this morning. The auditorium was packed, upstairs, downstairs, everywhere. 700 people were here in this house, and she was handing out little sweets 700 times. And so there's a lot of physical strength and energy that comes from purity, from God's love, your own faith, your own belief, and meditation, of course. So that's the reality of spiritual understanding. I want to explore this idea of illness and how illness happens. One of the things that I've understood over the last few years is that, when they say, well, it's familial, it's there in your genes, and so, yes, of course, you're likely to have a heart problem, you're likely to have high cholesterol, it runs in the family. We're used to hearing all of this. But whatever is in the genes, it's now very, very clearly understood that it doesn't automatically have to be expressed. Whatever is in the genes is going to be either suppressed or expressed according to the environment. And so whatever is this environment impacting this environment in here, and yes, maybe it was in my genes, but if today, and the external environment for all of us is pretty stressful, especially if you live in a big city like London, but it's actually everywhere. Living on a mountaintop in Mount Abu, do you think people are stress-free? No, not at all, because stress is not so much a question of externals, but our response to that. And so when you have a community of several hundreds with whom you're living day and night, then there's bound to be a few lessons to be learned. And, they say when two bits of sandalwood come together, they release fragrance. They don't create friction, they release fragrance, which means that when two yogi souls come together, and of course there's going to be different ideas, different opinions, but it'll happen with a learning, a fragrance that exudes. And so that causes stress. Relationships are the biggest cause of stress. And so relationships exist everywhere, wherever you are with a second person, never mind 3 and 5, but a second person, and there's going to be something or another that goes on. So anywhere external, there's going to be a situation that's probably stressful, but more than the externals, it's my own inner responses and how I deal with situations. And so what meditation is teaching us is to maintain an inner calm and stability, and to increase my own capacity for patience, for peace, for understanding, for compassion, so that I'm able to absorb more of whatever it is that's going on without allowing it to cause a reaction on my part. And in this way, the stability that I maintain is going to suppress whatever there is within the DNA. And so definitely, I know for a fact that you can either have them expressed or suppressed just simply through our own inner being and our own state of being. Normally, a person would say, well, how can I be responsible for what I'm feeling? If there are people who speak to me in a particular way, of course I'm going to respond. But no, the whole journey of meditation is to come back to self-mastery, self-sovereignty. We use the term Raj Yoga. Raja, the sovereign, the master, and yoga, the union with the divine. And so that state of self-mastery has nothing to do with crowns and jewels, but it's everything to do with becoming the master of the self. Being able to create a state in which I'm comfortable, I'm experiencing spiritual growth and progress, but also I'm able to hold that awareness no matter what's going on outside around me. 1 person, 10 persons, it doesn't matter, but I'm able to hold that. So definitely creating that condition in which I'm able to be the master of the self is very healing. Another aspect of the whole subject of karma, and people on a spiritual journey know that illness and karma are very linked together, well, sometimes it may be the karma of the present moment. Remember the days when you had too much ice cream? You probably don't do that anymore, I'm sure. But there were times when I'm sure we did. Well, if the child gets sick after eating too much ice cream, it doesn't take too much to work out what was the karma that led to the stomach pain. And so sometimes it could be very simple things. And I'm giving the example of a child and ice cream. But think about your own diet. And you know by now that you're 20 years old or 40 or 60, whatever it may be. But there's so much information that's been made available to us now. We know what is the food that's going to create comfort and health within our physiology. And we also know what are the things that create all the little blips and ups and downs in our health. And so am I always ready to follow my own natural instinct of eating what is right, and even at the right time, not even just what is right, but the whole subject of discipline in terms of timing is important. So what am I eating? How much am I eating? When am I eating it? It's all part of that state of mastery, which is not just mastery over my thoughts and feelings, but even mastery over my physical senses. And so that life of yoga, that life of discipline, definitely finishes off the immediate karma and the karmic fallout that happens where I don't understand all this. What about long-term karma? Okay, in theory, I know that something happened and today I have this particular illness, and I may not even be able to identify who, what, when, and the particular illness I have today. That's okay. But am I able just to have a spirit of forgiving? Whatever happened, whatever are the negative feelings that I'm holding inside the psyche, I'm not just holding them in the psyche, I'm also holding them in the body. And that is also a fact. And so that whole subject of compassion for the self, compassion for others, being able to let go and forgive, that again is a very important lesson in settling karma and finishing the repercussions of the karma that might have happened somewhere along my journey. Well, there's even further distant karma. And I believe in rebirth. How many of you believe in rebirth? Okay, it is as I expected, a good number. And for those who don't yet believe in rebirth, you don't have to. You can find out more and explore that subject in your own time, no problem. But certainly, again, there's a very simple law. If I give sorrow, what happens? It boomerangs. I get sorrow back in return. Whatever I put out is what comes back to me. I give happiness, and the happiness comes. I give sorrow, and that comes. So today, my chariot, this precious chariot of mine, is giving me a lot of trouble, is giving me pain and sorrow at some point in my journey. When I'm not specifying, I won't be able to anyway. But at some point that happened. Who do I find? Who do I apologize to? Who do I go to? I have no idea. But what do I do now? One of the most powerful reasons why we practice Raj Yoga meditation is to be able to allow God's love to absolve us of whatever it is I may have done in the past. It's the only mechanism that exists to be able to purify and cleanse the soul. People meditate for relaxation, people meditate for good health, people meditate to try and achieve amazing, wonderful things. All of that is true, but that's not the only way. You can achieve all those things in other ways too. But the only thing that allows you to be free from the karmic burden of the past through God's love and forgiveness and purification is Raja Yoga meditation. Meditation with the divine. Raja, the supreme, the highest. And so whatever is the chronic illness, whatever is the critical illness, whatever it may be, but let me spend time in silence with God's love, settling the things of the past so that I can become free. So, a little summary of some of the things that I've understood from the spiritual perspective of health and well-being. Sit comfortably, and the best way is to balance the body with both feet on the ground and your hands on your lap. If you're holding other things, you can put them down. Reflecting on the things I've been hearing about, I go within. And I come to that awareness of the inner being, the being of light. I am a being of light and not the physical body. And in this awareness of who I truly am, I stay in that state of peace, which is my original, natural state of being. And in this awareness of peace, I can feel the presence of the divine. The source of love, of truth. Connected with the Supreme, I'm surrounded by the ocean of love and the power of the truth of this being. The peace, the love, and the truth heal the soul, cleanse and purify the soul. And the same happens to our physical body. The power of God's peace, love, and truth heals and purifies even the elements of the body. But the qualities of the divine also travel out far, far into the city, into the world, so that the entire planet is filled with light and is renewed. Holding this awareness, I come back to the awareness of the physical dimension, that I carry with myself this experience of peace, of truth, and love. Om Shanti.